Hello, I'm glad you're able to watch this message. It'd be great if you could visit sometime, but if not, find a good Bible-believing church in your area. Hope to see you sometime. Lord, thank you. You're good to us. We're grateful that we can share this short time together, Lord, as we're in your presence. We're in the presence of other believers, Lord, that you've called us to. And I thank you that we get to spend this time right at the beginning of the week to let you know that you're the most important thing in our life. At the beginning of this week, we're grateful that you've made it pretty clear that you're the foundational first cause of everything. We know you're powerful. We know you're wise. All of this came into existence by your power and wisdom, and we're grateful that it's pretty easy to deduce. We're grateful that you're kind and loving, as we've just sung, and that you have loved us in a way, Jesus, thank you that you have demonstrated your love for us. That you stepped into our world and took our place in the judgment that we deserve. Thank you for doing that. Thank you that no power could keep you in the grave. That you rose from the dead, that you ascended to the highest place, and waiting for a time to return. And we can't wait till everyone knows that you're the master of all. And Spirit of God, thank you that you live in us individually and among us together as believers. We're grateful that you are the one who calls us away from things that are false and things that are wrong towards those things that are right and true. We're grateful that you're that voice that continues to pull us away. Lord, thank you that you've inspired truth for us, that we can trust it. We don't need to invent it on our own or call our feelings the truth. We thank you for this word that's been inspired by you, that we can learn and humble ourselves in front of and trust as coming from your very mouth. And I ask that this morning that you would help us to understand these things that are in your word. In Jesus' name, amen. And I don't know if you've ever heard of Chan Gailey, a former coach, both NFL and at college level. His career is done now, but had a long career. He, at one time, was coaching for Alabama's Troy State, and they were heading towards a national championship. And he tells this story on himself where he was heading out to the football field for practice, and they're getting pretty intense with their practices. And a secretary came out, and she yelled after me. She said, "You have a phone call, Chan." And he said, "Not now. Take a message. You know, we've got some important stuff to cover out here." And she said, "Well, it's Sports Illustrated." And he said, "Tell him I'll be right there." And so he turned around, went back to where the phone was, and he picked up the phone. He said, "Hello?" And as he's walking back there, he's thinking to himself, "Man, this will be great for our small school. I mean, we'll get the coverage we need." And he's thinking, 3 pages probably won't do it for the work that we're putting in here. He's thinking, you know, on the cover, they might even want a cover photo, me, you know, and action or as a pose or something like that. So he picks up the phone. "Hello?" They said, "Is this Chan Gailey?" He said, "Yes, it is." They said, "Well, this is Sports Illustrated, and we're just letting you know that your subscription has expired, and wondering if you can re-up your subscription." And after he tells this story, he says this to everybody. He says, "You are either humble or you will be humbled." That's an interesting line that he has. What's the definition of pride? Pride is having a high opinion of yourself that results in a self-centered, self-serving way of life. That's what pride is. Pride's having a high opinion of yourself that results in a self-centered and self-serving way of life. Survey was taken between 19 82 and 2006. That's how comprehensive this survey it was. Taken of college students, 16,475 college students had taken this survey. 5 psychologists put it together, and it was called the survey that they took was the National or the Narcissistic Personality Inventory. And I'm going to pick up where the writing is here. The standard inventory asks for rated responses to such statements as, "If I ruled the world, it would be a better place," and they would respond to that. Or, "I think I'm a special person," they would respond to that. And, "I can live my life the way I want to," questions like that. The nationwide results were quite telling. Jean Twenge of San Diego State University is a professor there. She said, "We need to stop endlessly repeating, 'You're special,' and having children repeat that back." She said, "Kids are self-centered enough already." The study asserts narcissists are more likely to have romantic relationships that are short-lived, at risk for infidelity, lack emotional warmth, and to exhibit game-playing, dishonesty, and over-controlling and violent behaviors. And this was interesting. The researchers traced the phenomenon back to the self-esteem movement that emerged in the 1980s. They contest the effort to build self-confidence has gone too far. As an example, Twenge cites the lyrics of a psalm commonly sung to the tune of Frère Jacques. You guys familiar with the song Frère Jacques? Well, the tune is put to these words, evidently. In preschools, "I am special, I am special. Look at me, look at me." Would you imagine me singing that to you guys up here? Well, I just did, but I mean, in all seriousness, I mean, evidently, they're making a point here. Let me repeat the definition of pride again. Having a high opinion of yourself that results in self-centered, self-serving behavior in life. You ready for a pride quiz? Let's take a pride quiz today. I'm going to ask 10 questions on the pride quiz, and you're going to answer them for the person next to you. Okay, it's not you. The first one is, are you judgmental? My answer is, of course, everyone else is an idiot, right? Okay, number 2, do you reject others' opinions easily? Same answer, right? If your friend makes a statement about what you think is not correct, what will you do? Number 4, do people call you arrogant? Number 5, do you consider yourself the most logical person? Number 6, do you always try to seem perfect? Like in my case, it's actually true, but I mean, number 7, you know I'm joking whenever I say that stuff, right? Okay, number 7, do you get defensive in arguments? Number 8, in conversations, do you speak more and listen too little? Number 9, do you pass on offensive comments about others? And number 10, do you think you are the most intelligent and wise person out there? You can answer that for your spouse if you're married here today, and they'll let you know. The very heart of pride is this: self-dependence, which is independence of God. I want you to think about that for a moment. Self-dependence, which is independence from God. In other words, where do you put or base your confidence as you live your life? Where do you put your confidence? Or where's your basis? What's the basis for your confidence in life? Truly, if there is no God, then singing songs like that would be perfectly cool, because we need to base our confidence in ourselves and who we are apart from God. I am special, I am special. But if there is a God, then he needs to have our full confidence put in him. That's a beginning point. You think about Deuteronomy. I bet you've probably read through the Bible through that point so far, if you've been reading through. And And Deuteronomy means second statement of the law, second law, if you would. The very title means that. And why? Because God had called his people out of Egypt by signs and wonders that were just powerful. He delivered them, brought them out, brought them to Mount Sinai, revealed his covenant to them, the law, the Ten Commandments and the stipulations. He revealed that to them so that when they entered the promised land, he would govern their life among all those nations that he would kick out, among the nations that would be around the area. So they went up to the promised land. You remember what happened. They didn't trust God enough to go in. And so the Lord said to that generation of people, you're going to wander in the desert for 40 years until the entire generation of you faithless people dies off. And your children will go into the promised land then. So here they are, Deuteronomy. The children, after 40 years of wandering in the desert, are on the verge of going into the promised land. That's why it's called the second statement of the law, the second covenant. He's reaffirming the covenant with them. It's one of the most warm books you'll read in the Jewish scriptures, our Old Testament. And as you read through this, you get to this place as God's telling them how they should be in that land. One of the most powerful statements that he makes is here in Deuteronomy 8, verse 11. He says, be careful that you do not forget the Lord your God, failing to observe his commands, his laws, and his decrees that I'm giving you today, this day. Otherwise, when you eat and are satisfied, when you build fine houses and settle down, and when your herds and flocks grow large and your silver and gold increase, and all you have is multiplied, then your heart will become proud. He uses that word. Your heart will become proud. And you will forget the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. Let me stop there. A heart that's proud leaves God out and bases their confidence on what they have done. That's a heart that's proud. All those things that he did to deliver them and bring them up to this point and make them settle in that land that they have. There would be a period of time where they would dwell in that land and think to themselves this next statement in verse 17. We'll go down there now. You may say to yourself, my power and the strength of my hands have produced this wealth for me. There's plenty of people in our world thinking that exact way. Everything I have has come from how I've knocked on that door, how I've worked hard for my education, how I've worked hard to hone these skills, how I schmoozed those people and helped them understand how really good I am for that job. That's where I am. That's how I got this wealth that I have now. He says in verse 18, but remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you the ability to produce wealth, and so confirms his covenant, which he swore to your forefathers, as it is to this day. Don't ever get proud, is what he's telling them, and think this all came from you. You're the ones who got it for yourself. You see how tempted we are sometimes, even as God's people, if you're a believer here today, to do that very same thing. Think that we did it somehow. Our world is about self-exaltation, isn't it? Not just the United States. It's about raising yourself up, pushing yourself forward, especially in the United States, though. Pride focuses on your own ability to do certain things. And God has ways of dealing with people completely intoxicated with themselves. He has ways of dealing with people like that. And we read it in the scriptures. Maybe you have had an experience where God helped you see how intoxicated you are with yourself and brought you low in the process. You know, God has ways of dealing with people. And one of the examples that stands out in God's word is that of Nebuchadnezzar. You know, this completely ruthless and godless world leader at the time that Daniel existed. And he was the one who broke the back of the Assyrians as the general of the Babylonian army at the time. And because he did that, his father stepped aside and gave him the throne of Babylon. He's the king now, and he began to conquer the entire known world. Just a ruthless world leader. And you read some of his exploits and about how he handled himself. He would rank among the most ruthless in all history, even of recent times. But God had a way of dealing with him. Daniel was taken out of Jerusalem and brought to Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar was training up a new kind of elite group of people to rise in the ranks of the government. Daniel was one of those sharp young men, but obviously because God had his hand on him. And he spoke to Nebuchadnezzar one time, interpreting a dream that Nebuchadnezzar had. The dream that Nebuchadnezzar had scared him. It seemed like there was something that he didn't understand about what would be happening to him and to the nation. And indeed, it was God speaking to him. And Daniel came in and basically told him, this is what God says. He's going to take you low if you don't admit that he's the one who's sovereign over all the nations. He's the one that rules. He's the one that put you in that place. You're going to be brought low. Nebuchadnezzar didn't listen to him. And what we find in Daniel chapter 4, verse 28, all this happened to King Nebuchadnezzar. 12 months later, as the king was walking on the roof of the royal palace of Babylon, he said, is this not the great Babylon I have built as the royal residence by my mighty power and for the glory of my majesty? Notice the I's and my's in there. He was intoxicated with himself. His self-importance. The words were still on his lips when a voice came from heaven. This is what is decreed for you, King Nebuchadnezzar. Your royal authority has been taken from you. The very next thing, he was still speaking those words as he stood there surveying all that he had done. And just like that, it was done. He was just removed instantaneously. This message came to him. You will be driven away from people and will live with the wild animals. You will eat grass like cattle. 7 times will pass by for you until you acknowledge that the Most High is sovereign over the kingdoms of men and gives them to anyone he wishes. That's all God wanted him to do, is to say, I'm not the king of the world. I'm not the king of the universe. I'm not the one who makes all this happen. And what God's saying, I want you to understand that I'm sovereign, I'm on my throne, and I raise up leaders just like you who really don't care about me anyhow. But I will put you in your place, and I will tear you down if I want. I'm the one who's sovereign, not you. You see, and that's the issue of pride for all of us. Somehow we think we're the sovereign ones. And some of us are in bondage to that way of thinking. And unfortunately, in this area, sometimes the people that are in bondage to pride can't see it until they're slapped down, just like this. Until God deals with them severely somehow. Or they really listen to the rebuke of someone who really loves them and says, you are an arrogant, arrogant person. See? That's bondage. Nebuchadnezzar spent 7 years like this. Now, look what it says. Immediately, what had been said about Nebuchadnezzar was fulfilled. He was driven away from people, ate grass like cattle. His body was drenched with the dew of heaven until his hair grew like the feathers of an eagle and his nails like the claws of a bird. At the end of that time, I, Nebuchadnezzar, see, he's telling this story himself, raised my eyes towards heaven, and my sanity was restored. Then I praised the Most High. I honored and glorified him who lives forever. His dominion is an eternal dominion. His kingdom endures from generation to generation. All the peoples of the earth are regarded as nothing. He does as he pleases with the powers of heaven and the peoples of the earth. No one can hold back his hand or say to him, what have you done? At the same time that my sanity was restored, my honor and splendor were returned to me for the glory of my kingdom. My advisors and nobles sought me out, and I was restored to my throne and became even greater than before. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and exalt and glorify the King of heaven. because everything he does is right, and all his ways are just. I love this last line. And those who walk in pride, he's able to humble. He can bring people low. Nebuchadnezzar's telling us that. One of the most ruthless leaders who's ever lived and sought to conquer the world. He had an experience with God. You know, it's interesting to note, there's a lot of people right now just probably walking around ignoring God as we speak. People who have such a high opinion of themselves that they can ignore God's right to rule their life. In reality, that's what happens among people who don't know God. They don't raise their eyes to heaven and say, man, this totally makes sense. That there's a God who made me, who brought time and space into existence. I need to ask some very serious questions about his existence. You know, they come up with philosophies that exclude God and even from even existing and proceed to live life without him. You know, let me read to you 3 short scriptures about this. Romans chapter 12, verse 3 in the New Testament simply says this: do not think of yourself more highly than you ought. Do not think of yourself more highly than you ought. Even as a believer in Jesus, we can do this very thing. Galatians chapter 6, verse 3, if anyone thinks he is something when he is nothing, he deceives himself. Self-deception. And Proverbs 16, verse 18, one of the more famous ones you might have read, pride goes before destruction and a haughty spirit before a fall. And unfortunately, people have to many times learn this lesson the hard way. Someone who raising themselves up, challenging God, thinking they're all that. God has ways of just bringing someone like that down to their knees like he did Nebuchadnezzar, so that they look up and say, I'm not all that. And when it comes to eternal salvation, this issue is extremely important. This pride issue, this thing that I need to participate somehow in earning God's favor for my salvation. That's where religion comes from. It doesn't matter what the religion is. People have devised some way that make them feel good about connecting with God or the powers beyond in some way, that they can get what they want or somehow earn their way into God's favor. There's a set of rules that I need to start living by. There's a set of commandments I need to keep. And if I do all that, God will accept me based on my efforts. You know, the root of that is really pride. Someone saying, I can earn or make up for my sickness of soul. When in reality, we could never do that. And Jesus told a short story concerning this understanding that some people have, especially in Israel, where the average Jewish person would see religious people walking around. It was part of their religion, their religious leaders. And they happened to be arrogant and prideful because they had earned such a level of God's approval in some way that they were hovering above others as though they had arrived. And Luke chapter 18, verse 9 through 14, it said, to some who were confident of their own righteousness and looked down on everyone else, Jesus told this parable. In other words, I've earned God's favor. He's pleased with the way I'm living my life. And that's how these leaders were walking around among them. Surely he sees what I've done, and he's, pleased with me enough to let me into heaven and give everything I need to me. Well, he told this parable to those kind of prideful people. And he said, 2 men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. And so, if you're familiar with these folks, the Pharisee is probably the person that the average Jewish person would look at and say, surely that person has earned their way into heaven. Surely that person is keeping all the commandments. They're measuring up. So on one extreme, there's the good guy. And on the other extreme, the tax collector, as you're probably familiar, is one of the most hated people in their culture. Why? Because the Romans were using them to take money from the Jewish people. The Romans were occupying land that everyone resented, and they're taking taxes from them. And a Jewish person is actually taking the taxes from people, collecting them, and the Romans allowed them to take a little off the top, a little extra. That's why tax collectors were wealthy. So the average person walking along, when they heard the word tax collector, they probably growled on the inside a little bit and said, sinner, instantly. Pharisee was, he's our leader and they're measured up to what God wants. And so he uses a parable with those two people. The Pharisee stood up, he says, and prayed about himself, God, I thank you that I'm not like other men. Just like an arrogant, self-righteous person would do. Robbers, evildoers, adulterers, or even like this tax collector over here. And most people might be going, right. Even like this tax collector. And that Pharisee thought he'd earned his way into heaven. I fast twice a week and I give a tenth of all I get. Now, are those bad things? Absolutely not. But see, this religious person was basing his eternity and his acceptance with God on what he has done. This is why God is pleased with me. In verse 13, but the tax collector stood at a distance. He would not even look up to heaven. And everyone's going, I know, right? But he beat his breast and said, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. You see, the posture of that tax collector was exactly what needs to be our posture when it comes to eternal salvation. Not an arrogant, not a push yourself up, not a prideful position like the Pharisee might have. But his position was, Lord, I know that there's an eternity that I will possibly spend without you. And I deserve all of it that I get. I deserve it. That's what he's saying over here. I deserve my punishment because I've fallen so far short of your standards. I deserve it. But Lord, if you would, don't give me that. That's what mercy is. You don't get what you deserve. Please, if there's a way, don't give me that as my punishment forever. See, the starting point for someone is not to try to figure out some way of explaining away hell in the Bible. The starting point for salvation is someone understanding that that's what they deserve when they compare themselves to God. I deserve that, Lord. I deserve every ounce of that punishment. But if there's a way that you can just have mercy on me and keep me away from that, I would be so thankful. That's a humble heart. Someone who's lowering themselves saying, I can't earn your favor. I depend on something you would do for me. See? And that's what this is all about. That's what God stepping out of heaven. That's what God adding a human nature to his divine nature is all about. That's why Jesus going to the cross after and having the wrath of the Father poured out on him instead of us for what we deserve. That's what that's all about. So someone would turn to what God has done for them and say, thank you. I trust what you did for me. You see, there's no puffing yourself up. It's like, I receive your mercy, Lord. I understand that as mercy. Hearing Jesus cry out on the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me, is what we deserve. And so people would have been shocked at the next statement Jesus would make in verse 14. I tell you that this man, rather than the other, went home justified before God. That would have shocked everyone. The tax collector? The one who really does deserve hell in everyone's mind? Is going to go home justified, which is a verb form of righteous, measured up to everything God expects and get into heaven? For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. There's going to be a lot of people showing up in the presence of God going, haven't I earned my way in here? I was a pretty good person. And God's going to go, no, there's no one who's good upon the face of this earth. And there's no one who has earned my righteousness. And there's going to be tax collectors showing up going, thank you, Jesus. Thank you for what you've done for me. And the only reason they'll be in heaven is because God had mercy on them through Christ. You know, what I want to focus on this morning is the opposite of pride. And the opposite of pride is humility, isn't it? Humility is, in essence, if you want a simple definition, is lowering yourself. lowering yourself. That's what humility is. It's the antidote to pride. And pride is puffing yourself up. Humility is lowering yourself in front of others. And the passage that is most often turned to for this in the New Testament is Philippians chapter 2. This is where a congregation is addressed, the Philippian congregation, they're being addressed. And evidently there's something going on in the congregation that moved Paul to write this note to them about, in verse 3, chapter 2, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. This happens in every church. There's people who have a high opinion of themselves or do things only for themselves so that they'll be recognized in some way in whatever activity they're involved in. They want to be looked upon highly, right? They want to be considered in a category maybe above or separate. And so he says, but in humility, consider others better than yourselves. In other words, as you're among other people, he's instructing the Philippians here, and God's inspired word to us as well. He's saying, listen, humility is lowering yourself, and what is lowering yourself? Consider others better than yourselves. Others worthy to be pushed up. Others worthy of being raised up. He said in verse 4, each of you should look not only to your own interest, but also to the interest of others. You need to be people who have your mind, your eyes focused on others, not just yourself. There's others around me that need to be pushed up, need to be seen higher, need to be encouraged. And he goes on and he says, your attitude should be the same as that of Christ Jesus himself. So he's going to hold Jesus up as the highest standard for us to look at and say, there's an example of humility. This is the opposite of pride and arrogance. Let's take a look at Jesus, is what he's saying. And of course, I'll take a look at the rest of this in a few moments here. But humility, in essence, is an attitude adjustment within ourselves. That's why it's so hard for people to tear away from this or cut loose from this if they're in bondage to it, because they really can't see it in themselves unless someone else points it out to them. A lot of times, maybe you get sick of the way that you've responded to somebody else or the way that you've been behaving, but usually it's because someone else says, you shouldn't be that way. Someone very close to you and loving to you says that. That's not good. And this is a pattern in your life. Hopefully someone loving and kind you'll respond to, but like we looked at before, hopefully it isn't God going to have to confront you with that in a very powerful way to show you that you're not in charge of everything and that you can be brought low and need to look up. But our attitudes should be found in Jesus here as Paul looks at him. So I'm going to share with you 3 short things in case you're wondering. Man, is he just starting his 3 points? Short things. The first one is this: don't demand your rights. How easy is it for us, even the people around us who demand their rights? We have to have things the way we want them. You know, I shared with you the little girl that was sitting in the back of the car while Dad was driving, and she turns to her mom and says, Mommy, why do all the idiots only come out when Daddy drives? Because Daddy's calling everyone else an idiot but himself. That's why. You know, we all like to demand our rights in this life. Look at verses 5 and 6 here. He says in Philippians chapter 2, your attitude should be the same as that of Christ Jesus. Well, what was the attitude? Who, being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be grasped. Now, this is one of those places, by the way, that you can go if someone's saying, well, who is Jesus anyway? You can clearly say he's God. This is one of those clear places in the Bible. There's plenty of others that you can turn to, but this is one of them that's the most clear. This word morphe means his very nature, the essence of his existence is God. That's who Jesus is. You know, it's different. You know, we take a look at the Trinity, let's just say. The teaching of the Trinity is that the Father is a person, the Son is a person, the Holy Spirit is a person. They're separate individual persons, but all one true living God. It's a powerful concept in the Scriptures. There's a clear teaching that there is only one true living God, not many different gods like other religions and even Mormons believe in their polytheistic scheme. There's one true living God, and that Jesus is God, different than maybe Jehovah's Witnesses who deny his deity. See, we believe that he's God and man, okay? And so in verse 6, who being in very nature God did not consider equality with God something to be grasped. He's not insecure, okay? He doesn't have to demand his position be held. You see, from eternity past, as God, he existed with the Shekinah glory in heaven. All the creatures of that place recognize him for who he is. And they give him the glory that he deserves. And he doesn't have such a tight grip on being recognized for who he is, demanding his rights to be recognized for who he is, that he can't let go of that and exit heaven. Not become less than God, but not display everything that he's worthy of. He's not insecure. He was willing to be recognized of something less than he really is in existence. That's what happened when he entered our world. He didn't feel the need to impress everyone around him with who he really is. He allowed people to spit on him and beat him up. See? He never said to the Pharisees, "Oh, you disagree with me, huh?" Well, though he could have, at any moment he could have. He didn't do that. He didn't say, "No, I can't leave this." He didn't demand his rights. But we're used to doing that. It's easy for us to demand our rights, have things our way, you know. How many of you have seen that new movie out called The Jesus Revolution in the theaters? Anyway, it's a good movie, isn't it? Yeah. It's the story of the Jesus people of the 60s and early 70s coming to Christ just in large number. And who were they? They were just teenagers, young adults who were disillusioned with life, dropping out basically. And if there's any hippies in this room, you know exactly what I'm saying. But, and they were showing up en masse in California, just living the free life. And some of them in this spiritual search began to have their eyes open to the truth of Jesus and who he was. And Calvary Chapel was one of those places that began to accept them in and began to work with them, help disciple them, and lead others to him, to Jesus. And so it's a story of Calvary Chapels and Chuck Smith's involvement and all that. But we're in the theater, and I'm assuming that everyone in the theater, there's not too many people in there, was a Christian. I don't know who else would go see that movie, other than maybe someone dragged someone along to say, "Hey, you got to see this." But so we're all in there. I'm considering everyone brothers and sisters in Christ. And I kept hearing this phone go off in the theater, you know, like someone's alarm was set, and it kept going off, and it was faint enough for everyone really to get past it, and except one guy. And I've never seen this in a theater before. I mean, I've been to a few movies, and I've never saw someone actually stand up in front of everybody else in the theater and turn around and say, I forget the exact words, but "That's driving me nuts. Whose phone is on right now? Yeah, get that thing taken care of. I mean, I can't concentrate on what's happening here." And everyone's like, "Hey." And I'm double, because I know he's probably a Christian. And everyone else in there is a Christian too, you know. And so he gets done, you know, with his rant. You could tell he's like disgusted. He walks out, he walks back, you know. And I'm like, whoa. So I get back in the movie, and pretty soon the lady right next to us is, "Shoot," you know. And she's digging around on the bottom of her purse. And goes, "It's my phone." And she hits it and turns it off, you know. And here's this guy, you know. He's so used to having things his own way. I'm thinking, wow, what's he like with his wife in the house, you know, and other people around him, you know. That's kind of where my mind went, because I'm judging him because I'm so much better than he is, you know what I mean? And so, you know, demanding our own way. That's not what Jesus did. Number 2, choose to lower yourself. Choose to lower yourself. Look at verse 7 and 8. It says that Jesus made himself nothing, taking the very nature, there's that word again, morphe, in very essence, The very nature of a servant being made in human likeness. And so when you're trying to understand who Jesus is, he is God himself who added a human nature to his divine nature. That's what he did. He's the God-man. And so, you hear theologically it spoken of as the dual nature of Christ. If you ask, well, is Jesus God? Absolutely, 100% God. Well, is Jesus a man? Absolutely, 100% man. He's the God-man. And so we find this here. And so he stepped out of heaven, and a human nature was added to his. And the virgin birth and God overshadowing that process, we have this. And he was found in appearance as a man. He humbled himself and became obedient to death, even death on a cross. What's that? That's called lowering yourself. That's Jesus as God stepping out of heaven saying, I don't have to have all this. I can lower myself for the benefit of other people. And I can go to the lowest place. A cross, a crucifixion, a public crucifixion where everyone's looking at you as a criminal. And hanging there in shame, losing your life in front of other people. That's how low he went and was willing to go. He lowered himself like that. And it says here, he became obedient to death, even death on a cross. The lowest place. Not only didn't he demand his rights, but he lowered himself to do the most menial thing that could possibly be done to serve us. If he didn't do this, we would never spend eternity with God. If he didn't lower himself in humility and provide this for us, we would never see God. So he was thinking of others as he lowered himself so that we could live, and did that. A clear example of that, if you're thinking about this, and I've shared this before, obviously, is when Jesus was in the room and all the disciples came in for the banquet. And as they came in, there was no servant who would typically be at the door to wash their feet. You remember this? And so Jesus comes in, they all come into the room with their dirty feet, and they're sitting around. And at one point, Jesus gets up from the table, and he takes a towel, wraps it around his waist after removing his outer garment. And he kneels down in front of those followers of his, and he begins to wash their feet right there. I mean, it's shocking. It shocked Peter, because they're all speaking of him as the Messiah. They're all trusting that he is the King of Israel who has come. He's going to be reigning on the throne of Israel. And here he is. And that's what Peter said. You are not going to wash my feet, Lord. Called him Lord. And Jesus said one simple line back to him. He said, unless I wash you, you have no part with me. You have no part with me. And Jesus began to wash all of their feet, and the dirt came off. And, I think in the same way there is an image that we might need to have of Jesus lowering himself, washing their feet with that towel around his waist, and him hanging on a cross, washing our filthy souls the way he did when he died instead of us. He served us so that we could live. He lowered himself. We like to look good, don't we? How many of you like to look good when you go out? And you want to put the best foot forward. When someone asks how your day was, or, hey, did anything happen? Or tell us a story about some lesson that you learned. You pick out one that's not as really severe and bad, that doesn't put you in a bad light. You just tell maybe something innocuous. Because we don't like to look bad in front of other people. We like to carry a certain level of dignity. There was no dignity to this. There was no anyone looking at him going, yeah, I could see myself in that place. Nope. The same scene, and I mentioned that movie because I wanted to mention this too. See, the hippies began to show up at Chuck Smith's church, and the church was filled with people who were used to a certain way of doing church, right? A certain way of dressing for church. They all had suits on. They dressed up real nice to come in and honor God. But when the hippies started coming in the door because someone had started inviting them, people started getting upset. They stunk. They had bare feet that had dirt on them. They were getting the carpet all muddy. They had outbursts in the auditorium sometimes. You say, whoa, that's awesome, things like that. And the people that were used to doing church a certain way started getting upset. They came to Chuck Smith. They said, we can't have this. And long story short, a lot of people just left that church. They didn't like it. And what Chuck Smith did at one point, because someone did mention the carpet, is that he knelt at the front door of the building with a bowl of water. And as those hippies came in, those young people, those late teens and early 20s people who started coming into that building with their bare feet, just happy to be there, that someone would receive them in and accept them and teach them about Jesus for the first time. He would kneel in front of them, and he'd have them put their feet in the bowl. He'd wash their feet off, and he'd dry it with a towel and say, go on in. Go sit next to that guy with the suit. And he'd do that. He just knelt down at the door and just washed each one of their feet. It's a great, powerful scene in the movie. But that's the kind of people that God wants us to be, to lower ourselves, just like Jesus did, to serve others, to push others up, Last thing I want to share is this. Count on God to take note of your actions. Count on God to take note of your actions. Sometimes we feel our efforts are absolutely wasted if no one notices it, don't we? I'm a human being too, right? You might be thinking of me as something else, but we don't want our efforts to be unnoticed by others. We like others to see what we've done, to take note of that. Jesus entrusted himself to the Father. You look at verses 9 through 11. Therefore, God exalted him to the highest place and gave him the name that is above every name. That at the name of Jesus, every knee should bow, in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue confess that Jesus is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. He will be recognized one of these days for exactly who he is. And even now in heaven, his glory, his Shekinah has returned, and every creature in heaven is recognizing him for who he is. But when he went to this place, when he was kneeling in the Garden of Gethsemane, remember just before he got arrested, as he's there praying to the Father, you remember the prayer? If it's possible, take this cup from me, Lord. But nevertheless, not my will be done, but yours. You know what he was doing at that moment? He was entrusting himself to the Father. That if he went through this experience, that he went to that place where that painful separation would take place, that he would pay the price that every one of us owed, that he was leaving himself in the Father's hands. And all the power of heaven would raise him from the dead and exalt him to the place that he deserves to be. He left himself in the Father's hands. That's exactly what we should do. Look at 1 Peter chapter 5, verses 5 through 6. All of you, and this is interesting because Peter wrote this. Peter, the one who said, no, you're not going to wash my feet, Lord, who saw the image of Jesus with that towel around his waist, and also of him being crucified. He said, all of you clothe yourselves with humility toward one another. And I can't help but think that he had that image in mind. Put a towel around your waist. Put a towel around your waist. He says, because God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Humble yourselves, therefore, under God's mighty hand, that he may lift you up in due time. Leave yourselves in the hands of God. You humble yourself, he will lift you up. You don't need anyone else's attention. You don't need anyone else to recognize you for who you are. Even about when Jesus is speaking in the Sermon on the Mount about prayer and fasting and giving, what did he say? He repeated this 3 times in Matthew chapter 6, verse 6, and verse 4 and verse 18. Here's what he said. Your Father, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you. That's what he said. Who sees what is done in secret will reward you. I'm going to close with this. Any of you ever hear of Nik Wallenda? Of the Flying Wallendas? Those high-wire folks that have been doing this for generations, walking across, one of them actually died once doing that in front of cameras and everything. The flying one, he's a 7th generation Walinda. And as a child, his first debut walking a high wire was 13 years old. That's how he learned all this. He's a follower of Jesus, and it's not one of those where you go, I think this actor is a follower of Jesus, though I don't see. He doesn't have a problem talking about Jesus and sharing about the salvation we can find in him. And, he's the one, he walked across the Grand Canyon for the first time. First person ever to walk across the Grand Canyon without a safety net, walked across Niagara Falls. That's Nik Wallenda, okay? And here's what he said. This article said this: Wallenda knows that he will be tempted by pride. Listen to this. So after the huge crowds and the media fade away, he engages in a simple spiritual discipline. He calls it a spiritual discipline. He walks where the crowds have just stood and quietly picks up trash. And he wrote this about it. He said, "My purpose is simply to help clean up after myself. The huge crowd left a great deal of trash behind, and I feel compelled to pitch in. Besides, after the inordinate amount of attention I sought and received, I need to keep myself grounded. 3 hours of cleaning up debris is good for my soul. Humility does not come naturally to me. So if I have to force myself into situations that are humbling, so be it. I know that I need to get down on my hands and knees like everyone else. I do it because it's a way to keep from tripping. As a follower of Jesus, I see him washing the feet of others. I do it because if I don't serve others, I'll be serving nothing but my ego." Isn't that an interesting comment from him? Service, he called a spiritual discipline in his life, lowering himself and doing a menial task that no one else might notice. A spiritual discipline. And you know what that is? That's someone who doesn't want to be an arrogant, prideful person. They know how to lower themselves and don't care if anyone sees them. That's the antidote to pride. Don't demand your rights. Choose to lower yourself and count on God to take note of your actions. And Lord, we come to you and we're grateful. We couldn't be more grateful knowing your character. Jesus as one who would lower himself, and even to the point of taking the judgment that we deserve. And we couldn't be more thankful. I would like to think every one of us in this room would be in the category of someone beating their breasts, thanking you for your mercy that you've had on us. Lord, I do ask for everyone who does follow you with all their heart here, that they would continue to trust you and walk closely with you. Now, I pray for anyone who's a believer that has wandered away and has followed their own course of action in this world and left you behind. Lord, I ask that you would do a work that would get their attention and bring them back in alignment with you. And Father, I pray for anyone who may not know you today. Maybe they're sitting here thinking that very thought. I don't think I know God. I've just been religious, or I've left him out of my life. I ask that they would truly come to that place where they've trusted what you've done to save them. I'd like you to keep your heads bowed for just a moment and your eyes closed. Just a moment of prayer, nothing more than that, just in your soul, in your heart as you talk to God. If you love him with all your heart, tell him that today as you talk to him. If you're someone who's a believer that has wandered and you know you're not aligned with him right now because of whatever you've been involved in, talk to him about that. Confess it to him right now. Get yourself aligned with God. Maybe you're someone who hasn't, pretty convinced you don't know him. You want to make sure. This would be a great time for you to have those words with him. Tell him that you You trust what he's done and that you want him to forgive you for all that you've been involved in, and you want to launch out into a different way of living. If you're wondering, I don't know what to say, I'm going to pray a simple prayer, and if you go, that's exactly what I want to say, just go ahead and repeat these words as I pray. There's nothing wrong with that. So, Lord Jesus, I need you. I trust what you've done for me. I've done a lot of things that you hate. Been living my life apart from you. Will you forgive me? Would you come into my life? Would you change me? I want to live for you. In your great name, Lord Jesus. Amen.